Serious, Redditors who have lived in an orphanage, what was it like? From 2003 to 2005, I lived in a non-profit transitional living program. It started when DIFES placed me in a temporary home for displaced children. I was 17 at the time and lived with 9 other boys and 10 girls, all ranging between the ages of 6-17. Things were rowdy and, like another response, everything was heavily scheduled. I still had the freedom to get a snack or watch TV whenever I wanted though. It was mostly meal times and bedtimes. Every Friday night we had a big group outing like bowling or going out to see a movie. If you were older, you were allowed to walk down the street to the local convenience store by yourself, which was nice. Depending on your situation, you were also allowed to be signed out by a guardian or friend and leave for a few hours. I remember getting South Park banned from being played in the common room because of the younger kids. At a certain point, they decided to move me into their other program for older kids. This time the boys and girls had their own side of a huge townhouse with an RA available all times of the day. They helped us finish school, get a job, open a banking account. We were only allowed to keep 20% of our paychecks. Everything else had to be put into our own savings account. Apply for college if we wanted to go that route. Get your driver's license. It's basically all of the life skills you would normally learn from a stable family life. We had to cook dinner once a week for everyone on your side. There were different levels that you could attain that allowed you later curfews and benefits which I can't remember. We also had to see a therapist weekly and you would meet with your assigned RA life coach just to make sure things were good. You were never ignored and we always had support whenever we needed. Birthdays and Christmas were great and our wish lists were mostly fulfilled depending on what you asked for. You could get grounded, of course, which basically meant you lost all freedom and privilege for a week or two. If you drove, no driving. Your curfew was 11 PM. You have to be home at 8 PM. Of course, there would be the typical drama that would occur from a house full of teenage boys or girls. But I think at the time I was the only scene emo kid living there. Everyone else was big with rap and hip hop, so there was a lot of culture shock for me. At the end of the day, we were all brothers due to our unique situations. Unfortunately, I've lost contact with a majority of the other kids I used to live with. I've always been meaning to go back and visit and maybe volunteer, but I never get around to it. It was a great place for me and I've had some pretty fond memories during my time there. Feel free to ask questions and I'll hopefully get to them. This sounds like a really great place. I'm glad the system worked out for you. I don't know what state you're in, but if you ever want to volunteer with DICE, check if your state has a CASA program. Kids could use an advocate like you who lived through and benefited from the system. I wish you all the best. I lived in a group home for a while. It was interesting in some ways, especially being the only non-white in the place, and I honestly enjoyed the camaraderie. Also, it was nice to always have 3 wholesome meals per day. They gave me a lot of time to study. I could sit at the group table pretty late into the night and study. On the downside, I did not like the drama that just inherently existed when you had people from tough backgrounds all together. They just tended to handle things poorly. I once got into a confrontation and had a glass decoration thrown at my head. It hit the person behind me and gashed that person's eyebrow open. Later, when that gashed person was asked what happened, they said, "Oh, nobody punched me, da fuck." Oh well. You seem to have a pretty laid-back attitude about the wrongful accusation, which I find really admirable. I don't know if I would have just brushed it off. I wasn't an orphan but was placed in a home when I was 14 for my own protection. On the positive side, it was the first time I received spending money, had brand new clothes, freedom and my first boyfriend. On the negative side, I was a quiet but traumatized kid amongst louder kids, so I got very little attention. The food was great. We learned where the chocolates were hidden and helped ourselves. It was always busy and noisy with kids in different rooms playing music. For me, I loved it and think back on it fondly. I spent a year in a place of safety, so basically an orphanage. Boys and girls were separated, so I didn't see my younger brother often. A very weird thing that still has an effect on me 17 years later is during meals. If you ate too fast, you were teased and mocked endlessly by the other kids. So you always had to time yourself to not finish first. Now I still eat super slowly. I just remember it being very lonely. And like another user said, you weren't cared about as an individual. I've lived in group homes through the foster care system. It's a lot like an orphanage. It was definitely different. I'm sure you could guess that children who needed to be taken away from their parents aren't the most well-developed or mentally sound kids. Most were functional day to day. There are other homes for those who aren't, but some wild things would happen. One boy would just masturbate in his bed with no warning or attempts at concealing it. My brother or I would have to go tell the adults. Lots of time spent with each other as the only form of entertainment. We'd play lots of sports, lots of freeze tag, TV tag, etc. Many kids had anger problems, so the games would usually end in an argument or in rare cases a fight. We would tell stories to pass the time. Kids would talk about their old schools, or their parents, or anything really. You'd sit and listen, and then chime in with one of your own. We all became really great storytellers, for good or for bad. The adults were okay. They liked me and my siblings because we were relatively well adjusted and well behaved, but you could tell they were annoyed with some of the other kids. When they got really mad they'd have us clean the house as punishment, but no beating or abuse. The food was okay. We were always fed, bathed, and safe. Overall, it had its downsides, but it was a fine place to spend a few years compared to some of the other stories that I've heard. My sister and I were placed in an orphanage from the ages of 2-4 until we were adopted together. This orphanage was located in a remote area of Russia. We don't remember many details, but the orphanage was organized, clean, and generally not too bad. The food was the same almost every day, mainly porridge, cheese and crackers, and we were already handling chores such as laundry. There was plenty of playtime and we took a lot of walks outside for exercise. Being adopted was the greatest thing that ever happened to us, and every child wanted to go home with any adult that visited. We were very fortunate to be adopted together because it doesn't always happen with siblings. This was also back in the 90s when Russia allowed the US to adopt from their country. That was fortunate for us as well because we were able to become US citizens during that time. Wasn't an orphanage, but a foster home. Me and my older brother placed into care when I was 5, he was 6. 1/2. I stayed in the system until 18. Was shifted around a lot because of openings in other homes, I guess. Due to moving every 4-6 months, I stopped making friends at schools and became withdrawn. Family only visited at birthday and Christmas. No phone calls, but we all lived in the same city. WTF. I saw hundreds of kids over my childhood, most of them maladjusted, poor upbringing. Lots of gang kids. One girl from Iraq whose family fled from Saddam's regime. She saw her father killed in front of her and she would scream herself awake every night. Ended up at a great place where I stayed for 10 years. Settled well, did well at school and went on to be a contributing member of society, which is rare. It was crap sometimes. Not much money to do stuff. I had clothing bin clothes, discarded from people then donated to children in need. But it was better than living with my family, by a long shot. I was in an orphanage in Korea from the age of 6-10. When I was 6 my mom dropped me off at the orphanage and promising she would come back later. So day in day out I waited for her, but for 4 years she never came. But somehow I always thought she would. I've seen people getting raped, me being one of them. Once or twice a week like clockwork the older guy came for me. After a while you drown it out and always hope he will finish early so I can go play with my friends. I was forced to fight my best friend once a week. I never wanted to hit him, but we fought knowing if we don't we will get beat up even more by the older kids. My best friend who also got adopted same time as me are still great friends here in America, but at the time we always planned how we wouldn't really throw any punches but roll around the ground acting like we were fighting, and that satisfied the older kids' entertainment. They have burned me on my arms and back. I have so many scars. It's a constant freaking reminder every freaking morning. There are times when I was so hungry I had to eat out of the trash can at lunchtimes at school. Every day I was made fun of because I was poor. I wanted to kill them on the spot for making me feel like I was below them. Then one day I got a call that I was going to America. At that time I didn't want to go. I felt selfish for leaving my fellow orphanage friends. I cried not because I was going to America, but I was scared shitless about my friends and kids that's coming and that has to go through what I had to go though. Anyways, long story short, what I have just wrote was the fire that drove me to become who I am today. Very success business in America. After that was established, I go back to that same orphanage and volunteer 3 months out of the year. I have had 3 name changes, 3 birthday changes, and 2 nationalities. Sorry about my English, even after all the years I'm still very bad at it. I wish I could tell more, but I don't think anyone will read just because it will be in the bottoms of the comments. You're not bad at English at all. I'm thankful for reading about your experience. Sad, but also happy that you now have such a successful life and are giving to other orphaned kids. I grew up in a children's home from age 6 to 18 with my twin sister and my younger brother because my dad was very sick and my mom was an alcoholic and a drug addict. I didn't have an abusive childhood. My dad just couldn't take care of me. There were always kids moving in and out and very few stayed as long as I did. So it was sometimes hard to build meaningful relationships. My house parents stayed the whole time I was there, which is good because having parental figures change constantly can be traumatic. My house parents taught me everything I know about how to succeed in life and I still consider them my parents. Everything was surprisingly normal as far as I can tell from how my other friends described their childhoods. I was in band in high school and had a job and a car to drive. I was free to do pretty much whatever I wanted with my time as long as I finished all of my homework and kept my grades up. After I graduated high school, the children's home paid for all of my college expenses including tuition, living expenses, and helped me buy my first car so that I would graduate debt free and start trying to build something for myself. Being put into that children's home is probably the greatest blessing I will ever receive and I'm thankful every day for it. Happy to hear this story. For a few months, me and my brother was in a group home called Boys and Girls Village in Connecticut. It was clean, had activities, a gym, and I had my own room. It was okay. Celebrated my birthday there and had a cake. I was 7. We were bused to my old school, which was cool. They also had a gift room where you traded points from chores for stuff. Me and my brother saw each other every day. We couldn't have video games though because not everyone has one. I don't remember sharing being an option. Anyway, solid 9/10. If you threw a tantrum, they put you in the cool down room, which was just a room filled with soft gym toys you could punch and throw around until you calmed down. There was multiple buildings, so maybe some kids that needed extra care was kept there because everyone I was with was pretty well adjusted. My aunt got us in the end, so hump. We need a cool down room in our office. I was an orphan in what was left of Russia, Soviet Union in the very early 90s. My orphanage was called Maternity Home Number 8, if that gives you any idea of what it was like. I was there from birth to about 4 years old, so I don't remember much very clearly, but I'll say this. One of the issues people have with adopting kids from Russia, especially back then, is they usually have serious issues with socialization. And that's mostly because infant childcare was very different there than it is in the US or most everywhere else. Babies were not held, they were not played with, they were given food and changed, and that was just about it. So to this day I still have some issues, but thankfully they've mostly been worked out. I live in the US now. I was placed in a group home at age 12 and aged out at 16 to live on my own. There were between 8 and 10 girls there at a time. I was the youngest and the smallest for a long time, and got the crap kicked out of me on a regular basis until I wasn't the youngest and smallest anymore. The staff did what they had to, no more no less, then went home. Most staff didn't last long, the few who did were typically cold and uncaring. School was optional, meals were optional, but locked down. If you wanted lunch, you ate at lunchtime, or you didn't eat until dinner. Missed dinner? Tough, wait until breakfast tomorrow. Better eat fast too, or your food may disappear off your plate, because seconds don't usually happen. I learned to shut the heck up and do what I was told and duck when anything, fist or object, came flying my way. I made a point of befriending one of the biggest girls, and she ended up protecting me for a while, until she aged out, but I was bigger by then, and not the newest anymore. I learned to drink and tried a bunch of different drugs, but luckily never hurt myself in the process, and no addictions or problems with any of that. Honestly, it sucked. It fricked me up, made me nervous and anxious and defensive. But it also taught me that no one in the world gives a dang. Not really, and you have to take care of yourself. Never count on anyone else to take care of you, and then you won't be disappointed. Lived in a children's shelter for a while. One thing I noticed was how tough, for lack of a better term, the lifers were. Kids would resort to violence over the smallest things. For example, if you were in their spot on the couch, we were 8 or 9. Lived in a crisis shelter, basically where kids go until they're placed in a foster home, for about 8 months. Staff didn't care about us except one lady who was an angel. I used to self-harm a lot and was asked about it, but nothing was ever done. I used to pee the bed even though I was 16 because of family abuse issues. I would be scolded and made to sleep in the soiled sheets. Boys and girls were separated, but the boys used to bang on the bathroom wall because it went to our bedroom. We didn't get any food for when we went to school, so I was always hungry. I only have one pair of clothes to wear and to sleep in. They were often soiled because of the bedwetting. There was no shampoo or soap in the shower ever. I had to ride the bus to school and back, but it was a 3-hour bus ride. Like another user said, no one cared about you and you were completely alone. I spent Christmas and Thanksgiving there and nothing special was done. It was heck. Schedules. Everything was scheduled. Food was scheduled. You wanted Saturday morning cartoons? They ran between 7:30-12 o'clock. You were forced to eat breakfast between 8-10. Forced. You were not allowed to opt out. Best inhale chocolate cereal in the commercial. One bowl only. Same with Saturday cleaning. If you do the cleanup, you get allowance. And once one kid realized she was rubbish at cleanup, no one taught her. They only complained that she hadn't done it right. She asked to forfeit her allowance. No, still forced to clean. When she refused, she was grounded. This was nowhere in the original clause. School? Ha. Forget it. Cheapest possible, with Maharib the occasional library trip. Advanced placement, with no adults on your side. You'll be stuck doing things you already know. Forever. No adults on your side. Ever. The collective is worth more than the individual. Nobody loves you. They love everyone. Not just you. Which means nobody cares about you as an individual. You are not special to anyone. Source. Spend some time in a state-run home for children taken from their parents. That sounds like a poor way to instill a positive worldview into a child. I was in state care in Scotland as a child. It was a great time as I had been taken from an abusive home. There were 6 girls from 8 to 18 and 9 boys of the same age range. I was there for a few years before being rehomed at age 13. It seemed great at the time as we were all friends together, but none of us came through it unscathed. Most are dead now. Addiction, suicide, depression are rife amongst those of us left. It was better than the 10 years before it and I retain fond memories of it, but it is not something I would wish on any child. It's not till adulthood that the lack of love and direction really hits, and it hits harder every year. It wasn't called an orphanage, but it was a secure unit through the care system, so people in the care system who were a danger to themselves or others were placed there. It was terrifying and often violent and incredibly lonely. There was a school since we couldn't go out, but there weren't enough spaces, so I went to school 2 mornings a week. Own room that locked from the outside. Nothing in it but a bed and desk. Nailed to the floor was more like a cell. 4 cigarettes a day. This was the 90s. Don't really remember what we did outside of school or on weekends. I was terrified of the staff and other young people, so spent as much time in my room as possible. The electricity for our rooms was controlled from outside, so I'd sit and read underneath the tiny window, but half the time, my room was stripped, so I had no books. I was there for self-harm, but punishments were for looking at staff the wrong way, being disrespectful, anything. And books were taken away. Frequent strip searches. Frequent restraints. Frequent injuries. Horrible place. Do group homes count? I feel like that's basically the modern day orphan home. The biggest thing that you never notice until years later is you don't get raised. Nobody loves you. There's no affection. It's a job. The few people who do care aren't allowed to show it. And even then it's the abstract I want to do good care. Not your family. I didn't get hugged for 6 years straight. Think of every time you had a horrible day, and coming home and hugging mom was what made it better. Staff aren't allowed to cuddle the kids. You'll get fed, clothed, go to school, and go through the motions. But nobody raises you. It's not home. It's a place you stay. After that, it's the schedule. Every minute of every day is planned. Time to get up. Time to eat breakfast. Time to pack your lunch. Time for school. Time to go back. Time for chores. Time for meals. Even free time is blocked out on the schedule. Time for meds. Time to go to bed. Time for lights out. Fun side effect of this massively managed life. I have no ability to keep to a schedule. I need to check to know what day of the week it is most of the time. I've gone places only to find out they are closed because I failed to notice the holiday. I need to set alarms for just about anything. I can barely eat without a reminder, because even if I'm hungry, I have the habit of waiting for food time. I never eat first at a shared meal. I'll always wait for somebody to tell me the food is ready. You don't socialize for crap. Community time was scheduled and tied to a system that rated your behavior. If you were a bad kid, you got 10 minutes to go outside unsupervised a day, up to 2 hours if you were perfectly behaved. So the vast majority of the time, you are cooped up in a common area with 15 other kids your general age, all bored, all with behavioral issues, or we wouldn't be in the group home. So my doc tells me I have antisocial tendencies. I wonder why. Lived in one after being separated from biological mom from ages 2-5. Very early, so limited memories. I can very vividly remember being mistreated by the other kids as I was the only blonde-haired blue-eyed kid they'd ever seen. Made me quite introverted, but I like it. I was so fortunate to have been adopted out by the foster care provider's sister's stepdaughter, who has been my mom now for 20 years. It's a little hard to imagine how it would be, especially as you get older. We need to do more to help foster kids. They have as much potential as anyone, and maybe even a little more with that fire burning in them. I lived in an orphanage in Russia from 1994 to 1998, adopted to the United States. Life in a Russian orphanage is rough, or was rough, don't know much about now. During the time I lived there, rape, theft, abuse, bugs, starvation, fear, crime was daily routine. Girls that lived there were always looking for the next kid that may jump them at nights. Kids all fought for food. There was a huge shortage. Obviously everyone was afraid. So yeah. Everything was bitter in the one I was in. The elders treated us kids 12-16 like we were inmates in prison. The food was horrible. More often than not it was oatmeal, if anything, for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and the same 3 things for dinner in rotation. Holidays came with fried chicken, which was stolen by other kids who would beat you in your sleep if you were dumb enough to protest. There were rumors of sexual abuse and obvious physical abuse daily. I was sent to school in cloths that didn't fit and were old and well worn, so I was picked on. I could go on and on about how that place messed with me mentally. Just know that not all are alike, but there are those out there that profit off of taking and damaged children and treating them as bad, if not worse, than criminals and delinquents for the sole fact of not having a reliable parent. In one word, lonely. I was in group homes, foster care, and mental hospitals from when I was 9 until 14. Have you seen those movies where the main character is in a room and they are in focus but everything else is a blur that swirls around them? It's a lot like that. You couldn't physically touch anyone and couldn't interact with members of the opposite sex at all. No one would answer your questions. They just referred you to your caseworker. If you talked to any other residents, the workers would question you about what you were discussing. It didn't take long to just stop talking to people. I came from a poor family and was an hour and a half from home, so I couldn't run away. I didn't see any family for months at a time and no friends for half a decade. I spent some of the most formative years of my life just floating. Hope you landed well. I had a boyfriend who, when he was a child, his mom remarried. His new stepdad didn't like him, so his mom said he was a difficult kid, put him in a group home, then moved down to Florida to live with her new husband. He said it was like Lord of the Flies. When he turned 13, one of the female workers started having sex with him and another boy. She was in her early to mid-20s. He brought me by the building to show it to me when we went back to his hometown for his stepdad's funeral. It was abandoned, institutional, in the woods, and really spooky. Before his stepdad died, He said, "Well, you graduated college. You showed me, didn't you? I guess you're not so bad after all." That was the nicest thing he had ever said to him in 25 years. My poor BF was tearing up and couldn't speak. It was awful. That poor guy, my heart breaks for him. I didn't grow up in an orphanage, however I bounced around from shelters, group homes, respite care and residential treatment centers because my parents were abusive addicts and found themselves in trouble with CPS. On top of all that, I had mental health problems, depression and anxiety. It was a very structured environment which I liked a lot because it was consistent. I always shared a room. The units were not co-ed. We had daily chores to do and group therapy. Most of the staff were pleasant and helpful and most of the residents were nice. The hardest part about being in the system was education. Most of the places I was in had schools on site and the curriculum was not grade appropriate as far as public schooling went. I found myself really behind when I would be sent back home and tossed back into public school. Also, residents could be restrained if they were a danger to themselves, another resident or staff member. There was nothing more unsettling laying in bed at night listening to one of my peers shouting, "Get off Emmy, I hate you, leave Emmy alone." It could go on for hours, and occasionally having your stuff stolen by other people on the unit, which sucked. There was a mild dress code but no uniforms. You couldn't have makeup and were basically stuck in a building or campus type environment. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.